video, we're going to consider tags. I'm going to add some tags to this floor plan. Now, tags are just simply symbols that are hosted to model elements and report information that is contained within those elements. And we have tags for all sorts of things. In fact, we can tag just about any kind of model element in Revit, and we do so with the same tag command, regardless of the category of element. So that command can be found in a few places. It's up here on the quick access toolbar called Tag by Category. You will also find it here on the Annotate tab right there, or you can simply use the keyboard shortcut TG. Now, when you run that command, you will get a little prompt that says, click to place a tag, and what it's really meaning is to click on some element that you want to tag. So what I'm going to do is zoom in the upper corner of my floor plan here, and I want to just show you the behavior of the tags without clicking just yet. So don't click yet. I want you to just sort of move next to an element. And notice that the default behavior is for the tag to appear with a leader line attaching it to its host element. So there's a square symbol for walls. Here's a little pillbox symbol for doors. Here's a diamond symbol for windows. We've got a little hexagon type symbol here for furniture, but all of those are using a leader to point back to the object. Now, sometimes the leaders are nice to have, like in the case of walls. So let me go ahead and tag a couple of these walls here. Now, this time I am clicking to place those tags, but I think in the case of things like doors and windows, we probably don't want the leader. So you have control over the leader here on the properties palette. So all you need to do is uncheck this little box right here to turn off the leader. And now when I touch one or more doors, you can see that the tag will simply appear next to the door or next to the window, depending on which element you select. Okay, now let me just do a couple more here. I'm going to do a few pieces of furniture like so, and then I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel out. So the next thing that I want to consider is the information that is being displayed in the tag. So you can see that the walls, the doors, and the windows all displayed some information. The furniture did not. Okay, so I want to discuss all of those issues. So the first thing that you might find a little surprising if we consider the doors is the numbering of the doors seems a little bit sporadic, right? Well, let me dispel one of the first misconceptions about tagging that new users to Revit often have. The assumption is that the act of tagging is what is creating the numbering, and that is not the case. The door number already existed by the time we got around to placing the tag. In other words, when you place a new door in Revit, it immediately numbers that door. All the tag is doing is asking the door element what number it is, and then reporting that in the tag. So the active tagging is not doing the numbering. It's not even required for the numbering. It is simply reacting to the number that's already there. So I can show you that by selecting this door and scrolling down here on Properties palette. And what you're looking for is this property called Mark. And there you'll notice that this door is Mark number 102. If I select this door, it is Mark 112. This one is 111. If I come over here to this door, which we haven't yet tagged, it is Mark 104. So if I return to the Tag by Category command or type TG and I click on that door, notice that it comes in as door number 104. So again, hopefully that shows you that the number is already there. All the tag is doing is reporting that value. Okay. Now, if I select this window, and I scroll down and look for its mark, you can see it's Mark 105. And this one is Mark 106. So what's going on here? Why are these reporting 42 instead? Well, the other thing you need to know about tags is they're not required to ask just the one question, what's your mark? A tag can ask any question. In fact, that's the way that I like to think of tags. Think of a tag as a symbol that is asking the elements in your model one or more questions. Okay, so in the case of the door, the symbol is saying, hey door, what is your mark value? In the case of this room element right here, it's saying, hey room, what is your name and your room number? And it reports both values. In the case of this wall and this window, they're both asking the same question, but what is that question? Well, instead of telling us what unique item it is, which door it is, it's telling us what kind of window it is, what kind of wall it is. Okay, so that is a type property, and you can access it by going to Edit Type, and I'm going to scroll down, and instead of mark, it is the type mark. So notice that those two windows are mark number 42. If I change this to something else, I'm going to put in A here, and I click OK. Notice that even though I only selected that one window, this one becomes a type A window as well. In fact, if I go back to the tag by category command and I tag a few more windows that are the same type, they are all now type A windows. So that change only needs to happen once, and it's going to apply globally throughout the model. Now, this is a type P04 wall. This is a type P05 wall. And you can see that they're different because with this wall selected, it says that's an interior 5" partition here in the imperial file. This one is an interior 4 7/8 partition. So what happens if I take this wall and I change it to the same type as the one that we had over to the right? Notice that the tag immediately updates to reflect that change. So it's not just that you change the type value and it updates lots of walls, it also works the other way. If you change an object to some other element, it will be reflected there as well. So now directing our attention then to the furniture, what's going on there? Why isn't the furniture showing anything at all? Well, what we need to do is simply investigate what the tag is asking, what property it's looking for, and then make sure that we fill in a value for each piece of furniture. If there's no value input for the question that's being asked, then it just displays blank like you're seeing here. Now, one way that you could do it is to just try and take an educated guess. So I could select this table and I could look over here and say, well, what's the type mark? Let's put something in, right? So I'm going to put in T1 here. And you're going to see that nothing happens in the tag. So clearly it wasn't the mark value that tag was asking for. But here's another way that we could do it. What I could do is actually select the tag itself, and notice that a little question mark appears. So a shortcut way to edit the values is to actually edit it directly in the tag. And this is not that dissimilar to what we've done in previous videos with temporary dimensions. When you wanted to move a wall, you were able to select the wall and the dimension activated. You could type in a new value and that wall would move to a new position. You weren't really editing the dimension, but you were using the dimension to move the wall. So here we're not really editing the tag, we're using the tag to edit the value in the chair. So I'm going to put in CH1 here, and when I press enter, it's now going to give me a clue as to what value this is, because it says you are changing a type parameter. And it's also telling us this could affect many elements. Is that okay? I'm going to answer yes. And in fact, it did affect many elements, because notice that this one also became CH1. In fact, if I go back to tag by category and I pick this chair, you can see that one is also a CH1 because all three of them are the same type. So now if I select this chair, I go to edit type, scroll down, and we look at the type mark, you can see in fact that it's CH1 right there. And of course, if you change it, it will reflect that change in all three of those tags. It's not possible for those things to get out of sync because you're editing the same value in both cases. So use whichever method is convenient for you, but keep in mind that it's not the tag that's important. It's the value within the object that's important. Now, this floor plan is starting to get a little bit crowded, and that is very common in a typical set of construction documents. And so there's a technique that we can use to kind of help us save a little space here. And I want to go to a different part of the plan to show you, like maybe down here. It turns out that you can have a tag that is hosted to more than one element. So I'm going to go back to tag by category. I'm going to turn on the leader line with the checkbox right there in properties, and I'm going to tag this wall right here. I'll cancel the command, and then I'm going to use this little grip control here, and I'm just going to drag it a little closer to the wall. Now, I could add another tag to this wall right here, but it turns out that this wall is the same type of wall. So what I can do instead is with this tag selected, I can choose this Add Remove Host button right here, and that's going to allow me to pick a second host, but it will allow me to pick a third or a fourth or as many hosts as I like. And as long as each host is using the same value, then it will report it in the tag. If you, in fact, choose a host that is a different value, then it's going to say varies. So I would encourage you to avoid doing that. So I'm going to remove that exterior host and keep those two. And so now I have a single symbol that's pointing to two objects And that just allows me to eliminate some of the clutter in my floor plan. Now, another thing that I like to do, which is graphical, is with the tag selected, I like to go to Edit, Type, and it's possible to include an arrowhead on these leaders. So I'm going to open up the list here. You can choose anything you like. I'm going to choose this heavy end. I'm going to click OK. And you're going to see that it adds that nice little termination on each of the leader lines. And of course, that applies up here as well. Now, another thing I want to point out to you is that when you're tagging, sometimes you will highlight an element and it will be an element that you don't intend to tag. Like, for example, right now my cursor is over the concrete floor slab and it's actually trying to tag that slab. Now, I don't think that's typically something we want to tag, but notice the tag right here. Now, if you click and you place that tag accidentally, you can always just delete it later, or you can just simply move away and it will not place that tag. If you highlight something like, say, this column down here and click it and there isn't a tag loaded for that category, then Revit will display this message and allow you to load a tag. I could answer yes if in fact I really did want to tag that item, and if I clicked it by accident, I could say no. Okay, so just something to keep in mind there, that each category has its own symbol that you can load in, and you can even make your own custom ones. So the final thing I'd like to show you here in this video is, what if you want to tag the rest of the elements in a particular category? Like maybe I want to tag the rest of the doors and the rest of the windows. You could touch each one, but there's a faster way. We've got this command right here called tag all, and it's actually tag all not tagged. And so this is going to allow me to select one or more categories. So I'm going to pick door tags and scroll down in window tags. And then I'm going to click OK. And notice that I get a set of tags for all the doors and all the windows. It will not double up the objects that were already tagged. So it's tag all, not tags. So that can be a really nice way to quickly add a set of tags to the entire floor plan. So at this point, I would encourage you to experiment further, perhaps go up to the second floor and add some tags up there just to get some additional practice. So I want to make a furniture schedule in this project here. So I'm going to gather up a list of all the furniture elements, and then we'll be able to start analyzing that in a variety of ways. So to create a schedule, you have two options. You can do it directly from the project browser by right-clicking the Schedules and Quantities branch and choosing New Schedule and Quantities. Or if you prefer, you can go to the View tab here, and there is a Schedule dropdown, and that first item, Schedules and Quantities, would get you to the same place. The first thing that Revit wants to know in this dialog is, what category do you want to schedule? So I'm going to scroll down and locate the furniture category. It will suggest a name here. I'm going to accept that name and click OK. So next we have to choose one or more fields that we want to add to this schedule. Now, in my case, I have 35 items available. Think of these as the questions that your schedule can ask. So there are up to 35 separate questions that I could ask the furniture items in my model. And you need to add at least one, but you can add as many as you need. So the first one that I'm going to add is the type mark. So most of the time on furniture schedules, we identify each piece of furniture by a type mark of some kind. Now there's a little green arrow here. You just click that to add that to the schedule. Now next, I'm going to add the family and type, and that'll place that below that. You can also double click a field to add it. So I'm going to double click the count field and then finally the comments. So I'm going to start with just these 4 fields for now, but you could certainly add more if you wanted to. And then I will click OK, and that will generate a list of all of the furniture items in my project. Now, we can make some adjustments directly here in the schedule. So column A is the type mark, and it doesn't need to be quite this wide. So if you put your mouse between columns A and B, you'll get a little resize cursor, and I'm going to stretch that over to make it a little narrower. The count also doesn't need to be quite so wide, so I'm going to make that a little narrower. But by contrast, I think it would be nice if family and type were wider than it is so that I can read the full information that's available there. If you don't like the size of the schedule, it is possible to zoom it. So you can do that either by doing Control and the plus sign, or Control and roll the wheel. If you want to zoom back out, it's Control minus, or roll the wheel the other way with the Control T held down. So go ahead and zoom this to a level that's comfortable for you. And then I want to tile this schedule next to my floor plan. Now, when you're in a schedule view, don't use the keyboard shortcut of WT. If you do, Revit will think you're editing the schedule and it will try and put the letters WT into the schedule. So what you need to do instead is click the button on the ribbon. Okay, and notice now that gives me a tile off to the side with my floor plan. Now I can resize these tiles with this bar in the middle here. So I'm going to make this floor plan a little bit larger, and then I'll click over in the floor plan and adjust the zoom so I can see the entire plan. Now, it's not required that you work this way with the side-by-side view, but I like to do that because notice if I select an element in the schedule, it will highlight the corresponding element in the floor plan, and I think that can be kind of handy, okay? So now what? Well, let's say that we're looking for a particular item. Now, in this case, I was able to zoom my entire floor plan on screen, and it's very easy for me to just sort of click through the schedule and locate the item graphically. But let's say it was a much larger floor plan and the level of zoom you're at doesn't allow you to see everything. So I'm here in the master bedroom at the moment, but I come down here on the schedule and I click this double bed that's listed here. There's a highlight in model button here on the ribbon, and that will zoom you right to the location of that element. So even on a very large floor plan with lots of elements, this can be a really easy way to locate a particular item. Should it have a hard time finding it in this view, you can use the show button here to open up additional views that might show that element. In this case, I'm simply going to close that. Now, in addition to being able to use the schedule to locate objects, you can also edit objects directly in the schedule. So if I keep this bed selected here, and maybe I want to try a different size bed in this bedroom, notice that I can open the drop down there and choose one of the other items. Now, I'm going to try the king bed first and see if that will fit. And it's probably a little too large for this room. But if I switch instead to the queen bed, that's perhaps a touch better than the double that was there before and fits the space a little bit better. Now I'm going to click over here into the floor plan, and I'll just use my arrow key to nudge that down just a little bit so that it's not touching the wall there. But I think that works a little bit better. Now, another way you can select elements in the schedule is it's actually possible to select more than one item in the schedule as long as they're next to one another. So what I mean by that is notice that there are these nightstands here. We can select all four of these nightstands at once by simply clicking and dragging through all four items. Now, I'm only seeing two of them at the moment in the plan, so I'm going to zoom the plan back out again and pan so that we can see all four. And now you can see I've got all four of those highlighted. Now, unfortunately, if you click the drop down and try to change the type, that will drop the selection. So you can use the schedule to make a multiple selection, but you really need to use the floor plan to edit it. So let me show you that again. I'm going to click and drag through all the nightstands. Before I try and change anything, I will click over here to the floor plan. Now, I usually do it by clicking on the tab so that I don't accidentally deselect anything. Notice over on the properties palette, it still says furniture 4. So that's telling me I still have those 4 tables selected. And now I can simply open up the type selector here and choose a different size from the list. So I'll go from the small to the large, and it will change all 4 of those. And notice here on the schedule that they're all changed here as well. So this is what I was talking about the schedule being just another view of the model. It is not possible for information in the schedule to get out of sync with the floor plans or the sections of the elevations because you are looking at the same model. The right-hand side of my screen is showing a graphical view of the model. The left-hand side of my screen is showing a tabular view of the model, but it's still the same model either way. Let's make 1 or 2 more edits here. In addition to being able to select elements and change the type over here, I'm also able to edit many of the other fields. So I'm going to click in the type mark field here next to the Corbu chair and type in a designation for that, such as CH1. When I enter that, it will say this change is going to apply to all elements of that type. And I'm going to answer OK. And notice that that fills in two fields in the schedule because both of these were the same Corbu chair. They must share the same type mark designation. And in fact, you could repeat that by filling in additional items, and notice that the broiler chair is used in many locations throughout the model. So that filled in several spots. Now, if you prefer, there are other ways you can modify that same information. So if I come back into my floor plan and maybe select this sofa right here, I could go to edit type. I could go down to the type mark property. I could put in a designation. When I click OK, it will fill that in over here in the schedule as well. So just another example of this being the same model showing the same information in both places. So using either of those methods, go ahead and fill in the type marks for the remaining furniture elements. And when you're done, it should look like this. In this video, I want to share with you a few common techniques that you can use to modify existing schedules. And the aim is to make them convey the information maybe in a clearer way, make the information that they're trying to convey a little bit more evident to the recipients. So we're going to look at things like sorting and grouping and things of that nature. So this exercise file actually opens up with two views. So you'll see here that I've got a floor plan and the schedule open. Now, I just want to remind you that if the schedule view is active and you want to tile two views, you want to avoid using keyboard shortcuts, because if you type a keyboard shortcut in a schedule view, it's going to start trying to type the keyboard shortcut that you're typing into the schedule. It's going to think you're editing the schedule. So what I'm going to do instead is go over here to the View tab and click the Tile Views button instead of typing WT. Then I'm going to resize the column here between these two tiles just to make the floor plan a little bit larger so that I can see the entire floor plan. The first thing I want to talk about is where this schedule view sits in Project Browser. So if you look at your Project Browser here and you scroll down, there is the Schedules and Quantities branch. If I scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see that there's a few sub-branches like Schedule Typical and Schedule Working. Now, the name of this branch here says it's by type. If you select right on that, you can see that there's more than one option to group the views in that branch of the browser. We can either do all, which just does a flat list, or in this case by type, where it's sorting by these subgroupings. In the case where you haven't assigned a type yet, which is the case with our furniture schedule, it will just go in this none branch here. So if I want to move it out of none into one of these other two branches, it's as simple as selecting the schedule and then looking up here on the properties, and the type in this case is actually the view template that's assigned to the schedule. So you may recall view templates from an earlier video. If I click the None button here, you'll see that there are two view templates that I can choose from that apply to schedules. So I want to choose Schedule Typical. And unlike the view templates that we use to apply to graphical views like plans and elevations, these only have a few parameters in question. But what the result of this is going to be is twofold. When I click OK, the None branch will disappear and Furniture Schedule will jump up to the Schedule Typical branching instead. And notice that the title on the schedule has changed to become this large, bold text. So the view template is assigning those properties as well. So it's just an easy way to assign those graphical standards to the schedule and to get it grouped into the desired location on the project browser. So the next thing that I want to consider is in the schedule itself. If you look at column A, the type mark column, you'll see that there really doesn't appear to be any rhyme or reason to the way that this schedule is organized, the order that the items are in. You can see that it appears kind of random. And in fact, it isn't completely random, but the order that they're in isn't necessarily useful either. Items and schedules just appear in the order they were created unless you tell them otherwise. So the order that the furniture was created in doesn't really give me any useful benefit. So why don't we resort this schedule based on something that seems a little bit more logical? Now, to do that, you want to make sure that the schedule view is active, and then scroll down here on the properties palette, and you'll see several edit buttons down here. I want to click the one next to sorting and grouping. And in this dialog, you will see drop-down lists that will contain any of the fields that you can use as sort from this schedule. So I'm going to choose type mark. I think that's the most logical choice. And then I'll click OK. And notice that that rearranges the items in the schedule based on the type marks. Now, if you go right back to that edit button, you can make that ascending or descending, depending on your preference. I think ascending makes the most amount of sense here. Now, in addition to being able to sort by the fields, you can also group by them. So the way grouping works is you add the header checkbox here, and when you click OK, you'll now see these little separations where it's grouping the elements that are in common, in this case based on the type mark. And you can see that that makes a lot of sense or works really well for things like the chairs, where I've got this little group now of CH2. For individual items like the beds or the dressers, it's maybe not as useful since there's only one in each of those groups, but nonetheless, it's still adding a little bit of separation between each different type of furniture element. Now, if you want to add a little bit more space to make it even perhaps a little bit more legible, you can introduce a blank line, and that just adds some white space between each group. Now, once you've done that, the schedule might be starting to exceed the length of your screen here. So notice that as I scroll, the header in my case is going off screen. Now yours might not be, it really just depends because there's a setting on the ribbon that controls this. So on the modify schedule quantities ribbon, there is a freeze header button. If you click that, it will stay persistent. So once you turn that on, it should remain on until you turned it off. But now the way that works is any schedule will keep its header at the top of the screen as you scroll through the data. And I think that's usually a nicer experience. So I'm going to recommend that we turn that on. Okay, so those are some of the sorting and grouping options and other sort of graphical things that we can do to the schedule. Let's consider column C next. Column C is a numerical column. That's our count. And numerical data is usually justified to the right. But notice that in this case, it's justified to the left. That's just the default for schedules. So if we go back and consider all those edit buttons again, there's one next to formatting. I'm going to click that, select the count column, and then there's an alignment option right here. I'll change that to right alignment. I'll click OK. Center is also an option. And now I think that looks a little bit better for numerical data. And since I'm focused on the count, now it occurs to me that maybe instead of the sorting and grouping that I've done, what might make this schedule even more legible and useful is if instead of listing out 10 separate broiler chairs with a quantity of 1 each, it might be nicer to have a single line item that says that CH2 contains 10 items in the model. So the way that you do that is actually very simple. Go back to sorting and grouping, and we're going to uncheck itemize every instance. And when we do, you're going to see that now all those groups collapse down to individual line items, and then total is what we see here in the count column. And notice that clicking on that is now selecting all 10 broiler chairs or all 4 of the nightstands. So that single line item represents multiple objects. Now, once I've done that, I think I could go back to sorting and grouping and remove the header and the blank line because I don't think that's serving very much purpose anymore. And when I click OK here, you can see I get a much tidier list that just lists out each item and what its count is in the count column. And I think that's a lot easier for us to visually grasp and to understand. Now, I'm going to go back to sorting and grouping one more time and add a grand total at the bottom. And it could be nice to have that as well so that you don't have to manually total up the items. And you can see that this model now contains 26 elements. Now, it's not that I don't trust that 26 elements, but I do want to quickly verify. So I'm going to come over here to the floor plan, and I'm going to show you a really quick, easy way that we can just do a gut check and make sure that that number matches. Make a selection around the entire model, and then go to the filter command. Now, you may recall that in the filter command, each category of element that you have selected gets listed, And then there's a count column over here. Now, this is where you might look at this and say, something seems wrong here. The grand total of the schedule is 26, but here it says I only have 16 furniture items. Well, I kind of did this on purpose because I wanted to point out that one of the families that we're using here, specifically the round table family, is something called a nested family. So that round table family contains within it the chair family. And the schedule is able to see right into that family and report both items. So it's reporting the table family as a piece of furniture, and then the 6 chairs around it as 6 additional pieces of furniture. And then the same is true for this one here. So there are 6 chairs here and 4 here for a total of 10. And so now if we compare those numbers again, hopefully it's going to check out and make more sense. Here it says we have 16 items. That's the top level selection, but the schedule is going into the nested items as well and adding the 10 additional chairs. So it all checks out. And by the way, if we had just looked at the category right below furniture, we would have seen that there are 26 furniture tags, and that matches as well. So it also checks out that way. So anyway, just a couple ways you can quick do a verification and just make sure that you're seeing the data that you want to see. Okay, so it's always a good idea to just do those little gut checks every so often. All right, so now that we've kind of changed the way this schedule is sorting and grouping, and we've kind of gotten a better handle on the data that we have in our model, it's really easy for us to understand now not only how many pieces of furniture we have in the project, but how they're distributed. But that's not where the schedule needs to stop. Okay, so what I would like you to start thinking about is schedules aren't just for those reports that you create once and throw on a sheet somewhere and forget about. Really, what a schedule is, in my opinion, is a window into the eye in your BIM. This is where all the information in your building information model lives. And so if you start thinking of the schedule that way, then you can look for opportunities to create alternative versions of the same schedule that expose different kinds of information and give you different insights. So what I'm going to do is a quick example here. I'm going to click over into the Furniture Schedule tab, right-click the Furniture Schedule, duplicate it, and then I will just change the name right here and just add by manufacturer to the end of the name. So what I want to do instead here is I want to, instead of focusing necessarily on type mark like we're doing here, I want to focus on manufacturer. And to do that, I need to add a field to this schedule. So I'm going to scroll down, go to fields, locate the manufacturer field, and I'll add that in. Now I don't really care where it goes because I'm immediately going to go to sorting and grouping, and we're going to sort by manufacturer, make it a header with a blank line. Then we're going to sort by the type mark. Okay, so we're basically moving type mark down one. Then I'm going to come over here finally to formatting, select manufacturer and make it a hidden field. And now let's click OK. And what you see now is I've previously assigned some manufacturer information to the furniture items in this schedule. And because that information exists, I'm now grouping the schedule by the manufacturer. So it becomes very easy for me to see each manufacturer and what they're going to be responsible for in the project. In this video, we're going to discuss some techniques for data input in schedules, and I'm specifically going to focus on a tool called a key schedule. So let me start off by framing the problem here. I've got this room finish schedule. If I scroll down to the bottom here, you can see the grand total at the bottom is 153. So this project contains 153 rooms. And I have a total of 4 finishes that I want to fill in for each room: floor, base, wall, and ceiling. Therefore, that's going to be a lot of data input. So for example, if the entry was using hardwood floor and I put that in, and then maybe this living room is using carpet and I put that in, and the kitchen is using ceramic tile, right? Do you see how I would have to spend an enormous amount of time now because I'm typing in these values in each of these fields, 4 per room, times 153 rooms. It's going to take quite a bit of time. So what I'm trying to do here is speed this up in logical ways. So the key schedule is going to help me assign groups of finishes that I can group together under a key. and then I can assign them to the rooms in more of a batch kind of way. So let's take a look at that. But one thing I want to point out before I start building the key schedule is one little thing that will help speed input is Revit will remember what else you've typed into these fields. So if I start typing the letter C, for example, it will start to suggest other values in this field that use that same keystroke. So then I can just simply choose it from the list. Of course, you can also just open the list and choose it as well. So those two techniques will speed things up, but not enough to really make a huge difference. So let's move on to the key schedule. So to create a key schedule, it starts off the same as creating any other schedule. I'm going to right-click the Schedules and Quantities branch and choose New Schedule and Quantities. Scroll down and locate the category that I want, rooms in this case. And then over here on the right-hand side, I will choose Schedule Keys. Now, it suggests some names here, and I'm going to adjust those names slightly by slipping the word finish in before style in both locations. And then I will click OK. So this displays the Schedule Properties window, and we're on the Fields tab. And there are only 11 items listed here because a key schedule is limited to instance properties. So each of these values is eligible because they are instance properties. Now, what I want to include in this schedule are the 4 finishes that we see here in the background in the order that they appear. So I'm going to start with floor finish, then I'm going to go to base finish, wall finish, and finally ceiling finish. And then let me move this back up and click OK. And that creates an empty schedule. So next thing that I want to do is use this Insert Data Row button here to create my first entry. Now it suggests the key name 1, but we can use descriptive names. And so the name that I want for this first item is Unit Service. Then I will click Insert Data Row again, and I'll do Unit Public again, and Unit Private, and finally one more time, Building Public. Now that should be enough for our purposes here, but you could certainly create more of these if you wish. Now, the first thing that you'll notice here is that the drop-down menu works here as well. So any previous values that you typed in will show here. And so I could simply choose them off the list. So for the unit public spaces, I'm going to use hardwood floor, and I'm going to combine that with wood base. And I'm pressing the tab key to jump to the next field, paint for the walls, and gypsum wall board for the ceiling. For the service areas in the units, I'm going to do ceramic tile on the floors. I'm going to do vinyl base for the base. I'll do PT2 this time, and I'll stick with drywall ceiling. And in fact, I'm going to use the drywall ceiling here as well, but in the private spaces, I'll go with carpet, wood base again, a different paint, and finally, for our public areas in the building, we'll do our ceramic tile. Maybe we'll do a different vinyl base, a different paint, and let's do a different ceiling this time, acoustical ceiling tile. So it's not important that you put in exactly the same values as me, but it is important for the example if you fill everything in so that you can see the full benefit of using the key schedule. So now I'm going to click back to the room finish schedule and show you how we can apply that key schedule to this overall schedule. So come over here to Properties, locate the Fields area, click the Edit button. Select the field where you want it to go. So whatever you have selected here, when you add the field, it'll go after that. So I'm going to select the name field, locate my room finish style, click the little green arrow, and it will put room finish style after name. And when I click OK, you will now see that we have a new column in our schedule. And currently all the entries say none. Okay, so that is simply because we haven't filled anything in yet. Well, now watch the way this works. For the entry spaces, those are unit public. So I will simply select unit public from the list, and it will fill in all of the other entries. The living room is also unit public. The kitchen is unit service. The bedrooms are unit private. And as I start to fill this in, you can see that this is going to speed things up considerably over doing them manually. More importantly, it's also going to do it consistently. So I won't have to worry about typos because when I choose one of those entries, it does all the typing for me. Now, as we've already said, there's quite a few rooms in this model, so I still have an awful lot of work to do. So can we improve this even more? And the answer is yes. If you think back to the earlier video where we talked about modifying a schedule, I mentioned to you the importance of remembering that you could have more than one schedule for the same items to use for different purposes. Well, in this version of the file, I have a working version of the room schedule right here, which I'm going to double click and open up. And this one is set up a little bit differently. The limiting factor back in this schedule is the room number. So that makes each entry unique. But what I really want to do is assign the finishes more by room type. So in this working version of the schedule, I've removed room number and sorted and grouped based on room name. So now this single entry here called bathroom accounts for 10 rooms in my model. So if we repeat the steps that we did a moment ago and go to fields, select the name here, select the room finish style, add that as a field and click OK. Now we get the room finish style available here. And if I say that the bathrooms are a unit service space, it fills that in not just for one room, but for 10. The bedrooms are a unit private space. The dining room is a unit public space. And if we come back to our original schedule here, and as you scroll through, you can see that it's now filling in that information across the entire building, which is a lot nicer than what we had a moment ago. Now, we get to an item like this garage, and we realize that we don't have an entry for that. So you have two options. You can go back to the finish schedule, the style schedule, and add a new style. Or you can just simply type these values in and leave this set to none. So if it's not none, you can't edit them. But if it is none, you can just type in whatever you want. So it's easy enough to do one that's a one-off without having to create an entirely new key. So either method is fine. It's just a matter of how you want to handle it in the specific situation. So let me take a moment to fill in the rest of these entries here and take you back to the original schedule when I'm done here. And you can see that we've now made short work of this very long schedule. But there's one last thing I want you to see here. One of the really powerful benefits of using a key schedule is that if you decide you want to make a change, let's say that we want to use a different ceramic tile in the units, we can go back to the room finish style schedule. And I'm going to take the ceramic tile that's assigned to units service, and I'm going to change that to ceramic tile 2. And now if I go back to the room finish schedule, that has filled in everywhere that we were using that key in just a single step.